I see all 5 managers and it is 7 p.m. President Ziegler.
Hello, I'd like to call the meeting to order. The meeting's being held remotely due to concerns over COVID. And I don't recall getting a copy of the agenda, so I think I'll let Administrator Jeffrey take us through the agenda.
The approval of the agenda, it should be showing up on your screen now.
Okay,
You make it bigger.
Making it? All right.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I move we accept the agenda as written.
A second.
so we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion before voting on the agenda?
Mr. President,
Manager Cook?
my understanding, this being a workshop, we're only going to be having discussions. We will not be taking any action. Is that correct?
Well, there's one exception to that, I believe. One of the items is talking about the, what is it?
Letter to the
The
court.
letter to the court. So I believe that council may be asking us to approve sending the letter to the court.
Mr. President,
Yes,
my intention was to simply provide the board with an opportunity to ask me questions. And I don't
Okay.
feel like board action is necessary to authorize me to send the letter, but
okay, I stand corrected. So you're correct, Manager Cook.
Very good. Thank you.
President Ziegler.
Yes, Manager Crafton.
So I have to jump off for 10 minutes at 7:30. So just to make other people aware or when I disappear for a few minutes.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, can we have a vote on the agenda?
Manager Crafton,
Yes.
Manager Duval,
Yes.
Manager Cook,
Yes.
Manager Pedersen,
Yes.
President Ziegler.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, the next item is a presentation on stormwater ponds maintenance and wetlands management for phosphorus reduction. Terry, you're going to give the introduction.
Yeah, President Ziegler, managers, Dr. Natarjan and Dr. Gulliver are here tonight. They've done a number of different studies on pond maintenance and the efficacy of that, both in the cost benefit and in terms of just load reduction. Some of those projects we at Riley Perg have had a role in sponsorship of, and others have been done independently. I've asked them to come tonight and present on their studies. And with that, I guess I will turn it over to Purnima or John.
I'll take the floor.
Okay.
If that's all right, Terry. I'll
Gotcha.
just introduce Purnima. Thank you, Terry. This is a presentation about the project, the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory from the University of Minnesota, performed for the Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District between November 2018 and March 2022. It's on 5 ponds. Since that time, we've also used the information on the RPBCWD ponds, along with a number of other studies done in cooperation with Jacques Finlay and Dr. Ben Janke to inform a pond assessment tool. So this presentation will be given by Purnima Natarajan on the 5 ponds, and will also very briefly introduce the pond assessment tool that was possible because of the RPBCWD project, and we feel will be useful to Minnesota pond managers. So I would like to introduce Dr. Purnima Natarajan to give the presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Purnima Natarajan. I'm a research associate at the St. Anthony Falls Lab. So today, I'm going to be giving a presentation primarily on the assessment and treatment of internal phosphorus loading in ponds that we studied in the district, and also give some more updates on what else we have been working on, as John mentioned. I would like to acknowledge other researchers at the U of M, Vinny Taguchi, Ben Janke, Jacques Finlay, and Bill Herb, who have been part of this, not this project, but several other components of the ponds research we have been doing over the past few years. So today, I'll start with the background on our ponds research, how we got started, what we have been looking at, the reason we have been doing it, and presenting results from the study we did on 5 ponds in the district a few years ago, and trying to interpret what we have found and how we have used the data from this project and the many other ponds project we have been doing over the past few years to really focus on how to manage phosphorus in ponds. So some results from remediation technique modeling and a pond assessment tool that we have recently developed. So a little bit of background. So ponds, as we know, are put in place to capture runoff volume, primarily to control flood, but along with it, they can also provide water quality benefits. The assumption around pond design is that they capture solids that and other pollutants that are attached to these particulates, such as phosphorus, and they would settle to the bottom of the pond. And ponds are generally shallow, only a few feet deep, which means the water column is well mixed and not stratified due to temperature difference, and also have a high concentration of dissolved oxygen. Our research on ponds really got started in 2015 with data that the Riley-Perg Watershed District had collected in a previous survey that they had done on about 98 stormwater ponds. So this is a plot that's showing the total phosphorus concentration in many ponds, and the red line is the 95% confidence interval of the typical inflow concentration in stormwater runoff. The analysis found that there are at least 32% ponds that have a total phosphorus concentration that exceeds the inflow total phosphorus concentration to the ponds for this Twin Cities metro area. So that got us to thinking, why do these ponds have such high concentration of phosphorus? So is there an internal source of phosphorus because of release of phosphorus from the sediments? How and what are the factors that would control such a behavior, and what this means for managing phosphorus in ponds? So I like to show this graphic just to illustrate all the different processes that are going on in ponds. Much as to say, it's pretty complex with different physical, chemical, biological processes that are happening that have an interaction with each other. So once there is phosphorus that enters a pond as an input from the surrounding watershed, what happens to that phosphorus after it enters the pond? Well, we expect the phosphorus to settle to the bottom of the pond and stay there. But there are many different mechanisms that go around in the pond that can impact whether that phosphorus stays in the sediment. For example, dissolved oxygen and temperature are the major factors which control whether there is whether the water column is well mixed or if it is stratified because of temperature difference, and how much the concentration of dissolved oxygen is because it has a direct impact on influencing the phosphorus release from the sediment. So there's also surrounding factors such as presence of trees, tall trees or a thick line of trees, which can shade the pond, and this can prevent the pond from mixing. If the pond doesn't mix, then that means there is dissolved oxygen decrease in the bottom of the pond, and that again influences the phosphorus dynamics in the pond. So we have been trying to look at most of these processes through our work. And I'll try and present results that we have from monitoring and sampling some of these factors that influence phosphorus dynamics. So we studied ponds in the Riley Perk Bluff Creek Watershed District from 2019 to 2021. The primary objective of our study was to assess the internal phosphorus release in the ponds and study the impact of an ion filing treatment of the sediment, the goal of which is to reduce the release of phosphorus from the sediment and hence improve the water quality in the pond. So we looked at 5 ponds. They are located in the cities of Bloomington, Chanhassen, Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and Shorewood. They are primarily in a residential neighborhood and aged from the youngest pond is 13 years old to up to about 60-year-old ponds. They all treat stormwater. Some of them were historic wetlands. And this is a photograph showing the ponds. They're all green because of free-floating vegetation like duckweed and watermeal. Well, all these pictures were taken during the peak growing season, and you can see a dense and a pervasive cover of duckweed and watermeal on all these ponds. You will also notice there are plenty of trees around the ponds, which can cause sheltering of the ponds, one of the factors which can affect the stratificate mixing of the ponds and possibly phosphorus also. So yes, we chose 5 green ponds. Our approach to this in this project was to do in situ sampling, which was sending our very enthusiastic undergraduate research assistants out to the field. They visited the pond every other week, starting from May through November, used a probe to collect vertical profiles of dissolved oxygen, temperature, and conductivity during each visit, and also brought back water samples from these ponds that were collected near the surface and from near bottom of the pond to measure the concentrations of different phosphorus species in the water. We also did lab studies with sediment cores that were collected from each of these ponds. We incubated the sediment cores with a water column over it at SAFO. They were kept under controlled conditions to measure the rate at which the sediments would release phosphate into the overlying water under oxic conditions, which means there is plenty of oxygen in the water, and under anoxic condition, which means there is almost no dissolved oxygen in the water column. We also ran detailed chemical analysis of the sediment to understand the different forms of phosphorus in the sediment. This is important because phosphorus occurs in different mineral forms, and only some of them can become mobile or release under low oxygen conditions. So we wanted to understand how the phosphorus pool was in the sediment. So this was a 3-year study, which began in 2019. So it was a pre-treatment year where we did the water quality sampling and we did the lab study. And then ion filings was applied to three ponds in total. 2 ponds were treated in February 2020, and 1 pond was treated in February 2021. The cities executed the application. So following the implementation of the iron filings treatment, we continued to monitor all the ponds, including the other ponds that were not treated, for 2 more years. So for 2 ponds, it would be 2 years of post-treatment, and for the other 1 pond, it would be 1 year of post-treatment monitoring. So we also took sediments from these treated ponds to look at how the sediment chemistry had changed since treatment, to understand the impact of iron filings treatment. So after this slide, I'll be showing a lot of plots. So the very first one is a contour plot. It's showing the pond depth on the y-axis, or the water level. And the other axis is the dissolved oxygen concentration. This is the plot to your left. And the x-axis is months starting from June, when we typically start monitoring the ponds, up until about November. There are 3 plots for each of the years that we monitored the pond. And to the right is the temperature in the pond water column. So the DO plot, the yellow color, the more the yellow, that is almost no dissolved oxygen in the water column. So there's also a black contour line which shows the 1 milligram per liter concentration. So anything below 2 milligrams per liter is typically considered anoxic condition. So these plots show that in all 3 years, the ponds were stratified thermally. So you can see that in the plot on the right, there is a temperature difference in the water column from top to bottom, which means the ponds are not mixing, and there is a stratified layer. And also, there was almost no dissolved oxygen in the pond right up to the surface of the pond for most of the growing season, or throughout the summer months. This was the pond in Minnetonka. We saw very similar observations in another pond in Chanhassen. And you see that the ponds don't mix until late October or November. And we did have rain events during this time, but you can see that that didn't make any impact on the mixing of the water column. There was 1 pond where we did see periodic mixing. This was a pond in Bloomington, the Aquila Pond, where you can see in the 3 years, the water column had low DO from top to bottom for the peak summer months, but the pond did mix, which introduced oxygen into the water column. So you can see the shades of blue, especially in the 2019 plot and also in September 2021, which coincided with input from runoff entering the pond. Also with stratification, when the pond tended to mix fully during certain periods. So contrary to our assumption, the ponds are stratified and have low dissolved oxygen. It is more extensive and more common in ponds than we had originally thought. So one of the interesting observations that is related to low dissolved oxygen, ponds not mixing, and vegetation is this example right here. This in 2021, in this pond, the portion of summer where the pond was did not have dissolved oxygen almost from top to bottom, had a thick cover of free-floating plant at the same time. So we do notice, and this is a picture of how the pond looks like. So we did find a strong correlation between the coverage of duckweed or free-floating plants and the anoxic factor. Anoxic factor is the extent of sediments that are anoxic, like have a DO less than 2 milligrams per liter. So stratified densely, the pond is stratified and has a dense cover of floating vegetation. It has low DO over an extensive area of sediment in the pond. So we have seen this in many ponds, as you can see from the correlation plot on the left. So we know now ponds have low DO. What happens to the sediments? So here are the results from the lab incubation studies. So on the right side are plots that show the results from the sediment water columns. So the y-axis is the concentration of orthophosphate in the water column above the sediment. X-axis shows the number of days of the experiment, and the dotted lines show the 3 phases of our experiment, where we keep the water column oxic with air turned on. Then we switch off the air supply and measure the sediment oxygen demand. And then in the last phase, we ensure that the water column is anoxic by bubbling nitrogen gas. So an increase in water column phosphate suggests that there is release of phosphate from the sediment, which is accumulating in the water column. So as expected, under oxic conditions, phosphate release is minimal in most of the ponds that we looked at. So that is indicated by the negative number and the very small positive value of the oxic SRP flux that's shown in the table for the 5 ponds. Once conditions are anoxic, like we observed in the field, with DO being less than 1 milligrams per liter, we have a moderately high release of phosphorus from the sediment. So they were about in the same range for all 5 ponds that we looked at, which suggests that there is a good potential for internal loading in these ponds. The detailed analysis of the sediments supported this. So what I'm showing here is the phosphorus composition in the sediment. As I mentioned before, phosphorus exists in different mineral forms in the sediment. So this analysis divides the different phosphorus forms into bioavailable phosphorus fraction and the ones that typically are not available under environmental conditions typically seen in a stormwater pond. So these are the bioavailable fractions would be the loosely bound, the iron bound phosphorus, and the portion of organic P that can become labile because of bacterial activity. So the 2 plots that I show for Aquila and Bren Pond show the vertical profile of the different phosphorus forms in the sediment. So they from the top, 0 represents the surface of the sediment, 10 centimeters is 10 centimeters below the surface. So you can see how sometimes you do see a peak value of a certain fraction or how it decreases with depth. So the plot on the left is a bar chart that shows the composition as a percentage of the total phosphorus in the sediment. So the fractions that we have to be concerned about are the light blue one, the loosely bound, the iron bound, or the FEP, the orange one, and the green bar. So you can see that in the 5 ponds that we looked at, up to 50% or even 60% of the total phosphorus can become mobile under low oxygen conditions or even under oxic condition if you consider the labile organic P. So there is a potential for these phosphorus forms to release. And when we looked at the relationship between the mass of these mobile phosphorus forms versus the flux, anoxic flux that we measured in the lab, they show a good correlation, suggesting sediment phosphorus composition is key to the potential for sediment phosphorus flux to occur in these ponds. So we now know ponds become anoxic. Ponds have a great potential for phosphate release. Ponds have high phosphorus concentration, and they also have floating plants. So these emerged to be important in controlling the phosphorus dynamics in the ponds. And I've tried to illustrate that with 3 plots here, which show that these are related, and in the end, they impact the total phosphorus concentration in ponds. So the first plot on the left is the duckweed cover in the ponds, like how much % of the surface of the pond is covered by duckweed. And the y-axis shows the anoxic factor, which is the extent of the pond that is anoxic, the area of the pond that is anoxic for a duration of time in summer. So anoxic factor of 0 means the entire pond is oxic for the whole of summer. If anoxic factor is 1, that means the entire pond is anoxic for the entire summer period. So you can see that with increasing duckweed cover, there is a pretty good correlation with how anoxic a pond is. We also found good correlation between duckweed cover and phosphorus flux from the sediment of the ponds. And the third plot, the rightmost one, is we know anoxic factor means how represents how anoxic the pond is. So the more anoxic the pond, the higher the total phosphorus concentration in these ponds, really emphasizing the role that internal loading could play in affecting the phosphorus concentration in the pond. So if you have stratified ponds that have dense cover of floating vegetation and also have trees around them, which could prevent these ponds to mix, and which means there is a good chance of low dissolved oxygen over the bottom sediments, which impacts the release of phosphorus from the sediments. And if that is released, that means there is phosphorus input from within the pond, which affects the phosphorus level in the pond. So we have used the data from the 5 ponds we looked at in the district and combined that with data from many other ponds that we have been monitoring around the Twin Cities metro area. So in the 5, the Riley Park ponds, we also implemented the iron filings application. So iron has the affinity to bind phosphate. So previously we had done some lab scale iron filings dosing study to look at impact of iron filings on capturing or keeping the phosphorus in the sediment. And we had some promising results. So we wanted to try that in the field. So taking the results from the lab and trying it out in the field. So the application was implemented in the wintertime, where they were able to drive over the pond and spread the iron filings on the pond surface. So when the ice thawed, expect the iron filings to settle to the bottom of the pond into the sediment. So this was implemented by the cities themselves in Chanhassen, Minnetonka Pond, and Brent Pond in Eden Prairie. Post-treatment, we once again went back to the ponds, brought sediment cores from the ponds and incubated them in the lab to look at how the iron amendment impacted phosphorus release from the sediment. So I'm showing here results from Brent Pond, where we did the incubation study, and also from another pond that's located in the city of Shoreview, the Shoreview Commons Pond. These 2 ponds were treated at the same time. I think actually the same day, in fact, with the same amount of iron filings, the same dose. So you can see the phosphorus flux that we measured in the sediment before treatment, so before iron addition. Those 3 the graphs show the oxic flux, the anoxic flux, and the sediment oxygen demand, S max. And what we measured in the sediments that we collected after the treatment. So there was no release under oxic conditions from the sediment. Under anoxic condition, the flux was significantly reduced in the iron amended sediment, and the sediment oxygen demand also was lower from these treated sediment. And the results were promising for both ponds. And I'm going into a lot of detail with all the chemistry in the sediment, but that we did see the impact in the sediment as well, where we did the same type of analysis looking at the different forms of phosphorus in the sediment, just to see how the phosphorus had shifted from one form to the other. So we did detect an increase in iron-bound P, which is expected. You put iron, you expect the iron to bind the phosphorus in the sediment. We also noticed a small decrease in the labile organic P. This could be from breakdown of the labile organic P by bacteria, and once it become mobile, either it was it moved to the iron-bound P or it was released from the sediment. You're not sure, but we did see an impact on how the sediment also changed because of iron fighting addition. So you might ask, what about the water quality in the ponds, right? This is interesting. We did that in the lab. So I know this. So in this plot, I know that it's a bit crowded there. So I've plotted the water quality in the 5 Riley-Perg ponds that we looked at, and also ponds that were monitored at the same time from other metro region. So 2019, the black bar is the pre-treatment year, and post-treatment year would be for the ponds that have a star in them, and I've indicated that with the eye on the bar. So for 2 ponds, BCP 410C and 849W, the gray year, 2020, is the first post-treatment year. And then if you compare the surface TP to 2019, it doesn't look like the water quality improved in those 2 ponds. For Bren and Shoreview, the yellow is the post-treatment year, but those 2 ponds showed that the surface TP was reduced after the treatment. So the decrease in surface TP was observed in some ponds, but not all of them. But we did see a reduction in the SRP concentrations in most of the ponds. The other thing I will note is the presence of duckweed cover. We are still processing the biomass, but just visually, we could tell that in the Bren and Shoreview, the extent of coverage and the thickness of duckweed was much less post-treatment. So the data indicates that, well, the treatment worked in some ponds, but not the other. But I will also point out that there is variability in total phosphorus concentration just because of, the annual input and the seasonal variation from how much rainfall. So comparing the black with the gray, you can see that even in ponds that were not treated with iron, the concentration was much higher compared to 2019. So we looked at the rainfall records, and 2019 was a very wet year compared to 2020 and then compared to 2021. So we think that there is also the role of seasonal and annual variability in phosphorus input that could impact the phosphorus levels in the pond. This leads us to question, like, where is there additional remediation technique that is necessary to manage phosphorus in ponds? Since we started this work with the Rileyburg, Bluff Creek Watershed District, we have looked at other ponds across other cities. And we have tried to put all this data together, look at them together and interpret what the data suggests about ponds and phosphorus in ponds. So this work has been possible because of the support we have received from many cities, Watershed District, the local road research board, the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. And I will highlight two of the things that we have worked on recently. So if you're convinced that yes, ponds are posing a problem with respect to phosphorus release, the question is, so what do we do about it? Like what can we do to implement either in the pond or outside the pond? So what remediation techniques can be implemented to improve phosphorus retention in ponds? And other thing that I will talk about is how can we use all this data to assess other ponds? Like, do we want to do this full-blown assessment? Like, do we want to go out and monitor ponds? Do we want to take sediment cores, do all this work? Or how can we use the data that we have to develop an assessment tool that a city or watershed district can use to recognize or identify these problem ponds? So the first, the pond remediation work is a modeling project that was primarily done by Vinny Taguchi. I won't go into a lot of details about it, but the objective was to assess the cost effectiveness of different types of remediation techniques in ponds, and such as chemical treatment, which would be addition of alum or iron filings to the sediment to curb the release of phosphate, and mechanical aeration to keep the water column mixed and oxygenated, or reducing the input of phosphorus to ponds by implementing watershed-based treatment practices. I'll just summarize the result by saying these three measures turned out to be the most cost-effective than some of the other methods, such as reducing sheltering by trees around the pond. And one of the other important results is, again, not all ponds are created equal, even though they were designed and assumed that they would work. And since there are different processes that can affect how well a pond performs, it is and the difference in their characteristics, it is possible that a combination of remediation techniques would be necessary to get the most benefit and having a significant impact on the phosphorus concentration. I'll also highlight a pond assessment tool that we have recently developed in a project that was funded by the local road research board. It's a spreadsheet based tool, and the main goal is how can we identify ponds that are at risk for poor phosphorus retention, which can be indicated by high phosphorus level in the pond or persistent low oxygen condition or high sediment P release. This will be important when cities and watershed districts are planning either their monitoring or implementing remediation or future maintenance. Like, how can they identify ponds which are most problematic, and how can they use the resources to target these risk ponds? So I'll give a very brief overview of the tool, and we have used all the data that we have collected over the past few years to develop this tool. I will talk about the way the tool is set up. I know this is a flow chart that's showing lots of boxes, but let's see. The top is the assessment goal, which I highlighted would be high surface water TP, oxygen status in the pond, which indicates the risk for anoxia, and anoxic sediment phosphorus release. For each of these goals, we have provided tools which are either qualitative. So for TP, the tool option A is an assessment of ponds that would be at high risk of phosphorus. We also have tools in this, which are models, which you can use to predict these three goals. So use inputs to predict total phosphorus concentration or sediment release or oxygen concentration. The way we set up the tool was that the user can have basic, what we call as the basic site data, which would be derived from pond drawings, pond plans, or aerial imagery analysis. Anything that you could do using a computer with very minimal site visits, or maybe no site visit, just information that you would have on hand as managers. So land use, canopy, age, parameters like that, which you can use to assess if the pond is going to be at risk. The other type of input data would involve some type of water quality sampling or monitoring the pond, but it would require minimal effort because we have tried to use a combination of basic site data and some of the monitoring data, which can be more easily collected and would not require a lot of lab work or extensive field monitoring. So I will just show the screening tool. So it uses basic site data, as I mentioned before. So say you have 30 ponds that you want to assess. So the tool includes about 7 factors, such as construction year, presence of hydric soil, vegetation, canopy, land use information to assign a low, medium, or high risk to these ponds. So for example, duckweed covered is something that you can derive from Google Earth. So you can use the slider and even go back a few years to see what the pond looks like during peak summer and get this information and use this screening tool to maybe prioritize the ponds for any type of future work. So I'll end my talk with this. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have many questions, but I won't ask them all because you probably covered the answers and I just missed the relationships. But the P capture in the ponds with the iron, is that a permanent capture?
No, it can.
Or maybe a better question is how long does it last?
We have been trying to determine that. This technique is fairly new, and we so far have data only for 4 ponds, and it has only been a few years since we implemented the treatment. And also I will say that there are lots of factors which can influence how long the treatment would last, depending on how much phosphorus is input to the pond. But the short answer is no, we don't know how long the iron treatment would last. And no, the capture is not permanent because iron, phosphorus that is bound to iron can be released if there is extensive anoxia in the pond or like low dissolved oxygen in the pond. At some point, it would get released back into the water column. It really depends on how much iron we add. Typically, an excess dose should keep it in the sediment. Then, yeah.
On somewhat of a related question, the pond studies that you did in our watershed, most of those ponds have been around for 30 or 40 years, you mentioned, I think.
Yeah.
So do you have any notion of what the P levels were going back decades? Or have the levels been mostly climbing and just in recent times?
I don't think we have historic data on the phosphorus levels in the sediment, but the way the ponds work and with so many trees around them, it's a good assumption that phosphorus has been accumulating in the ponds over the past decades with all the organic matter that goes into the pond.
And you may have mentioned this, but the phosphorus levels that increased over time, does it reach a point of saturation in the pond where it actually can't absorb it, or the pond can't take any more phosphorus and it just naturally spills out? Or
Yes, so the sediment or all the particles that go into the pond, the sediment has like different type of metals in them, like iron, aluminum, which I keep mentioning with the sediment work. Those do fill up as more phosphorus, their capacity does fill up as more phosphorus comes in. So yes, they can reach their capacity that they can no longer keep the phosphorus in the sediment.
so if all this is successful in capture, if this is one of the main techniques, then does it become sort of a local toxic dump site of sorts, for lack of better words?
Well,
it's a little bit like the atomic nuclear waste storage at the power plants, where we like certain aspects of it, but other aspects are with us forever.
yeah, I wouldn't call phosphorus toxic until you have severe algae blooms that can cause like cyanobacteria, which can produce toxins. So phosphorus is a problem in that way.
Okay, I'll stop with my questions.
Yep. Mr. President,
Thank you.
Manager Cook?
I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Sure.
So one of the main question was, these ponds, do they have outflows into either creeks or lakes? But I'm particularly interested in they have outflows into lakes.
Yes, I don't know the particular lakes that are directly connected to each of these ponds, but they typically do end up in a nearby lake. So the reason we emphasize this is we don't want ponds to become a source of phosphorus to these downstream lakes. So it is important to control phosphorus in ponds.
No, I understand. So follow up. So did you, or was there a manner of, were you measuring inflows of phosphorus, sedimentary phosphorus, and then outflows of phosphorus when you were doing your studies?
We did not do inflow outflow monitoring at the ponds. Our goal was more to understand what's happening in the pond and hopefully use that to interpret possible outputs from the pond that can have an impact on water quality. We have done that type of study in other ponds, but not the ponds at Riley Park.
Okay. Well, just as a follow up to that, and I didn't have a chance to study your graphics, but did your graphics take into account fluctuating water levels and rain events?
Yes, pond hydrology or hydraulics will play a part in how much phosphorus exits the pond. That's work that has been done by one of the researchers I mentioned, Ben Janke and others, who have looked at water retention in ponds and how that affects the mass of phosphorus that either leaves the pond or stays in the pond. But yes, that can influence whether or not the pond has a net release of phosphorus.
Okay, so is that information part of your report or results? That
In the Riley Park ponds, we do have that data, but I'm not sure that was included in the report.
yeah, okay. Well, because you know, my view is that if these ponds hopefully, you know, don't contribute to the lakes, take in more and keep more phosphorus than what they release, and hopefully, if they end up being a major source of phosphorus into the lakes, but you know, I look at this, I'm saying, what's the major source of phosphorus in the lakes, assuming it's a problem in the lakes, and then attack that, the most significant source first, and then, you know, work our way back. And I look at, you know, how much bang for the buck, how much phosphorus can we take out of the system for the buck, and it will, in the future, would this report help us determine whether or not, you know, in-lake treatment would be more cost effective, at least initially, or would treating the ponds, or is it going to be the old "it depends" answer to that question?
Can I answer? Purnima?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So you guys don't have enough money for us to do that study, but we with the pond assessment tool, you can assess these ponds and make decisions that relates to lakes. You can make decisions about, for example, how much phosphorus is leaving a pond, how much phosphorus is going into the lakes. I think the pond assessment tool will be very powerful. And we put a lot of work into that. And so I feel very positive that will help lake managers and pond managers quite a bit.
If I could just follow up, so is this tool then dependent upon the district obtaining data on the ponds in order to go into your assessment tool and hopefully have some type of a recommendation coming out the end of the analysis?
Well, there are a bunch of a lot of levels in the tool, and level 1A, the one that Purnima, Dr. Natarajan described, is one which you don't need any data for aside from what you normally have on these ponds. To go beyond that, you might need a little bit of data, and then to go beyond that, you need more data. So there are 5 different pathways to work with this tool. And it depends upon how far you want to go in assessment. So the first thing you do, this is my impression, the first thing you would do is take a look at an aerial photograph and see which ponds have duckweed and water meal covering them. That'll tell you right away. These are your potential trouble ponds. Now, is there something downstream? You need to assess how much phosphorus is being exported from that pond, and that's a little bit different assessment. But you know that you have high sediment release of phosphorus, or you have an idea that you might have sediment release of phosphorus, and you have an idea you probably have high phosphorus concentrations in that pond if you have duckweed on the surface. So that's where I would start. Does that answer your question?
Well, I mean, it generally gives me some, you know, some background. So as part of your report, et cetera, have you made recommendation, or do you have like a process where you go through the various levels? If you were a district to, you know, do the assessment, or do you start with the lake and the inflows and then look at those and then you start there and work your way upstream? I mean, do you have any recommendation? Have you thought about a process, or would your analyses give us a recommended process that would, you know, help maximize the reduction of phosphorus, you know, in the lakes? Because I think that's all our ultimate goal.
Yeah, now that was not part of the project, but we have done work to help you do that. And that would be to figure out what's going on with these ponds. To do the overall project, that would be a different project.
Well, if I could just follow up, I think it's a concern, obviously, in some of the cities is that I believe the sediment is accumulating in these ponds. That's one thing. It reduces two things I understand, reduces their water retention, but two, also, if they get more phosphorus in there, then they're not really doing the job I think it was hoped for, which is part of that was to reduce phosphorus. And so would these be part of this looks at, treatments to at least take care of the second issue, which would be to help control the amount of phosphorus that would end up flowing into these lakes? And would that be part of an analysis that you would envision?
Yes, most certainly. Now, we have identified a way to determine phosphorus released from the sediments. And then you could use a TMDL type of model to, for example, P8 or wind slam or something like that, to tell you how much flow is coming from each of these ponds. And then you look at the lake, how much phosphorus is coming into the lake from each outlet, and then you could back up to so this really is how you would do what you want to do. I think the tools are there to do it. It's just that we haven't developed the tools. We are specific about the ponds.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, so it's just that to spend money on, my perspective is this. I'd spend money on ponds to keep the phosphorus out of the lake or to retain water so we don't have too much water in the lake or whatever it is. So if I personally going to vote on doing any work on a pond, I'd have to evaluate those two factors. So I can't see spending money on a pond just because it has high phosphorus necessarily if it doesn't impact the lake. And I'd say I wouldn't do it, but I would attack the lake first and work my way upstream unless it made more sense to attack the upstream phosphorus input. See what I'm saying? So, to decide what to do when, we have to look at doing some type of analysis. So maybe it leads me into the question. So would you be recommending we would do a level 1 or have the cities do a level, or what do you call it, 1A, and then depending on the results, move up to the various levels so we have a better idea of what impact the pond was actually going to have on our chemistry of the lake? Is that part of your report? Is part of your process? Do you have a recommendation? Here's the way to do it. Step A1, step 2, step 3. And so that's my question. Do you have that process?
Well, not working with the lakes because we concentrated on the ponds, but what I would recommend is to do the duckweed view and the 1A assessment and determine, based with your TMDL type of models, P8 or wind slam, how much flow is coming into the lake. So how much is being exported from the pond. Right. What's the concentration in the pond? You know that you have a certain amount of flow going into the lake, so you can determine the load of phosphorus going into that lake from that pond or from that watershed. And do all the sub watersheds, and you've got what's coming into your pond.
Very good. Thank you. That's all the questions I have right now. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
President Ziegler.
Manager Patterson.
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. I know you've used iron filings in these little ponds. I'm wondering what the impact is on wildlife that uses those ponds. I'm assuming there's nothing alive in them, just because when they're anoxic, there's probably not too many fish that are going to be able to live in that. But I'm thinking about, everybody that comes and tries to drink water from there, or the ducks that land on there in the fall. And Was anything taken into account for that when you were just applying that stuff to the top of the surfaces of these ponds?
Yes, this was a question that was brought up before we did the implementation. We did do a literature search on possible impacts from iron, and we didn't find any. And also, iron is naturally occurring in sediments, and the levels that we apply, we don't expect the concentration to be at a level that would be toxic. So no impacts to like invertebrates or like wildlife was expected.
Okay, thank you. I have just one other comment, and that is that the fact that we're only looking at phosphorus is a very small part of all of the contaminants that are probably in these stormwater ponds. Brake lining dust, chlorine from salt deposits. I mean, I couldn't even imagine how terrible most of them really are. And to only look at one tiny little thing out of the vast pit of what could actually be in there, I think it's a start, but a lot more has to be done, a lot.
We wouldn't disagree.
There's another group that's looking at chloride impacts. So there's related research on impacts of high chloride in ponds. So we are looking at that too.
But phosphorus is very important for our downstream lakes. Just because so few of them have been taken off the impaired list. And that's a travesty that we haven't gotten more ponds off the impaired list, impaired for phosphorus. And I think part of the reason is the ponds are not acting the way that we think they are.
Thank you. I think this was a good presentation. I think it's a good tool. You know, when we're evaluating a lake and the watershed that feeds the lake, you know, just the duckweed's going to give us a big indicator of potentially where phosphorus impairment may be coming from. And we can always use more tools. That, you know, it has to fit into our larger toolbox and method for determining when we treat lakes. And for the cities, I think it's important to know, you know, when do you need to dredge the pond and take out, you know, everything and hopefully start over collecting pollutants such as phosphorus. But thank you. I think this was very interesting.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share our results.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Good. So that looks like the next thing on the agenda is the letter to the court. Attorney Smith, do you want to take this one?
Yes, Mr. President, managers. This concerns the Spring Valley Friends case with the city of Eden Prairie. In that case, there was a pretrial conference and there was a representation made that the Watershed District Board of Managers had decided to acquire the property that was the subject of the lawsuit. I was concerned that that was not a correct impression to be left with the court. At the board did at its last meeting vote to go into closed session to consider the matter, but that's all that is a matter of public record. I drafted a letter to the court that I circulated to you, and I received some helpful comments from Manager Cook just concerning more precise language. I wanted to provide all the managers an opportunity to ask me any questions or offer comments before I send the letter to the judge. And I would only say that if, my view is we don't need to go back and review the discussion in closed session. But if we were to get into sensitive matters, then it'd be appropriate to go into closed session for that. But I think this is simply a matter of this letter to the court and give you all a chance to ask questions.
Well, Mr. President,
Manager Cook.
My view is, well, I guess, we could vote on this or approve it, but, I think the major objective, as Mr. Smith pointed out, was just to tell the court what their status is based upon, what requirements we have to disclose things. So I don't know that we need to go into any more, but I would hope that at our next meeting, maybe we're going to have another closed session. Hopefully there'll be some information that have been gathered since our last meeting. But I don't have any problem with Mr. Smith taking his letter and making whatever changes he thinks are helpful and sending that to the court.
I agree.
I also agree.
Same here.
I'm fine with it being sent.
Okay, so no vote necessary.
Very good. Thank you, managers.
Okay, that brings us to our district administrator work plan for 2023. Administrator Jeffrey, you're going to go through that.
Yeah, President Ziegler, managers, well, this isn't coming up well, so I'll open the original spreadsheet. And of course it isn't open, so. All right. So in the past, the work plan had been put together as really just followed the implementation table in the 10-year plan. And I think that's good for the district work plan, but I don't think it really captures the administrator's work plan. So I went through and divided into the major categories of work that I do in this role. And then within each one, set a goal or a number of goals, and then subsequent action steps with anticipated dates that I would complete those at. Within there, I've also added check boxes so that as they are done, I can indicate that they are done and maintain that report at my next review, or however the managers would like that presented. If you would like, I can go through it line by line. I don't know how effective that would be, but I guess I will look for your direction.
Mr. President.
Manager Cook.
I personally don't think it would be particularly helpful at this time for Administrator Jeffrey to go through it line by line, given when we received it. So I think from my perspective, like to get the opportunity, to review it in some detail. I assume take some time, and then I would like us to set a time to have a discussion. I don't know if that makes sense to do that at the next work session or not, but I guess that would be my suggestion. And we can formally address this at our next meeting, but I think that addressing this at the next work session would make sense. That hopefully give everybody, including myself, an opportunity to give it the attention that it deserves. And my final comment was I'm very pleased to see the work put into this, and I look forward to reviewing it.
President Ziegler?
Manager Pedersen.
I think maybe it would be really good for the personnel committee to meet with Terry, kind of go through what he's got here, talk a little bit about potential training, potential coach, so that when we do present this back to the group as a whole, we've kind of got a little bit of options if it kind of comes up as a need. I sort of sent this idea off to Terry after I got the first draft of this late this afternoon, and it seemed to him that that might be kind of a good intermediate step there. And I sent it to Jill, but she hasn't had a chance really to respond back. Jill, what do you think?
Sorry, I'm muted. No, I thought that was a good idea. I had too many meetings today, so I hadn't had a chance to go through it thoroughly, but I like that idea, and then being able to discuss with Terry areas that we could help reinforce what he needs or understand where some of any issues that we had, so. And then report back. So I totally agree with your response.
So Mr. President,
Manager Duell.
I tend to agree with both Manager Pedersen and Manager Crafton. I guess the thing that struck me about this, without going into it in detail, is that it is way too much detail. It almost feels like this could be turned into his weekly work plan, and he could turn, in addition to his time card, he could turn in components of this. So it seems to me from a board managerial perspective that the personnel committee would review this in some level of detail, and then as Manager Pedersen is suggesting, maybe have a couple of broad block areas that we would discuss either at a workshop or a meeting without getting into the minutia detail. This is like a version of going through the engineering report or many other reports that we look at. I mean, we have very intelligent staff and consultants, and wherever we can, it seems to me from a board, we should be trying to consolidate it and roll it up rather than getting into more and more detail. That's just my comment.
So one comment I had, I guess, is I'm hoping this is a tool that's useful to Mr. Jeffrey. I agree with Manager Duval. I don't want to see this every month and go through what happened and what didn't happen. But, it seems like a lot of work went into this. And the other, I think, question I have is, do you know of any other watersheds or people who are using this? Is that how you came up with it, or is it okay?
Those are Ziegler managers. No, I felt I was a little bit between Scylla and Charybdis on this. If I didn't go with enough detail, I was worried that well, okay, but what's your work plan? And then as I started doing it, well, to me, the goals are ultimately that work plan, and the action steps are how I'm going to achieve that goal. So as I started looking at the goal and started thinking about, well, okay, how are you going to get to this goal? I could have continued out to 10, 11, 12 action steps on each of them. I just kind of picked a cutoff point and called it good. So yes, I do think it'll be helpful to me. But I agree, there's probably more detail than would be in a typical work plan.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook?
a couple of additional comments based upon the comments of other managers. So, first of all, it's hard to give much thought to critiquing this until I actually have time to review it. I get the sense that some managers don't like detail, and that's fine, and they can ignore the detail. But the other thing I like about this, I think this is a good start for having an SOP / a disaster preparedness type of plan. Heaven forbid Administrator Jeffrey's in the building and the was it 60 years ago or 70 years ago? We had the last tornado in Chanhassen, I think it was. Heaven forbid that would happen. But I think a good management practice is to have a SOP, or I think you call them MOPs, President Ziegler. And it's a good start and I think every position should have something. The level of detail, I think, depends a little bit upon the individual and how comfortable they feel it's enough to convey what they need to do and help them to do it. So I guess enough of my comments, but I would be more than happy to have the personnel committee, come back with their thoughts. But I for certain would like to have this part of a discussion at a workshop, and those who want to participate can participate. Obviously, those who don't, don't have to. But if you're going to have it at a personnel committee meeting, I would appreciate that it be recorded so that I would have the benefit of the discussion at that time. So those are all of my comments. Thank you.
President Ziegler?
Manager Crafton.
Yeah, so I see this as a tool when it comes time to his review. I would find a whole lot more value just in the staff report as to knowing what's going on. And I mean, there's a lot of detail in that, but this would be helpful for Terry for himself. And when it comes time for the reviews, it would be a document that he could put forward and say, this is what I did. And he's got some documentation behind that. So that's a value I see with this.
Mr. President,
Manager Duval.
so I guess I would like to just add to Manager Cook's comment. And I think the whole notion of some type of spreadsheet like this might be helpful in a number of other areas. And Administrator Jeffrey probably can figure out ways to work this into some other areas that would be helpful, because it seems to me that as a watershed, we're dealing with mountains and mountains of data and information. And a lot of it goes into schedules. Sometimes it goes into a file somewhere and you remember it, goes on a calendar. And if it's something, it's much like the projects that are picked out for 10 years, where you go through and evaluate the priority. Something like this might even be good for just things that are rolling in on a day-to-day basis. And you see something that seems important today, it might not seem so important tomorrow, but if it goes on a schedule or something, maybe it's another mechanism to track and also provide a kind of a roadmap in emergency situations. Anyway.
Oh, Mr. President.
Manager Cook.
It's a small one. I started using a spreadsheet for the meetings, and we have all the, our regular meetings column rather than the workshops, and, go the items down there. And I use it and I put hot links to the various documents or emails, etc., right into my spreadsheet, so that hopefully I can just click on them and bring up the appropriate documents. I just throw that out as a technique that I saw somebody do, and I've adopted it. And for anybody else's consideration, if they think that might be helpful, speed things up and find things. That's it. I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay. Manager Jeffrey, was there anything else with regards to the work plan?
No, not at this time. I will work with the personnel committee to set their next meeting and get that properly noticed. And then based on their recommendation, bring it back to the board for the full board's consideration in whatever form is decided upon.
Mr. President.
Manager Cook.
And lastly, I just want to commend Administrator Jeffrey for putting the effort into this. I mean, I know it's a lot of work, but I think that was great. I mean, that's, you got to start, and it's a really great start.
Thank you.
Good. So what's next on our agenda?
2022 annual report. I'll share again. Managers, staff has put together the 2022 annual report. At this point, the only comments I have received are from Manager Cook. Once I hear from the rest of the managers, then I will go through all manager comments. We are on a bit, as always, on a bit of a timeline, tight timeline, but what I would like is direction from the board, if you know, really to incorporate, you know, the comments that I've received, to go through the comments that I've received, incorporate or respond to those comments, and just then at the April meeting, or we could do it at the April workshop if the managers want to add an action item to that, authorize the distribution of the staff report.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook.
I think that it would be a good idea if Administrator Jeffrey and whatever staff he has working on this would, you know, take a look at the comments, get back to us with their view on the comments, and maybe even have a redraft if that's possible for the April meeting. And if you know, and have a you know, and have a workshop. I think it's important to have a workshop. You know, I'm sure if Administrator Jeffries looked at my comments, I have, you know, quite a few of them, and having to do with, I mean, a lot of things. I'm happy if you share those with the other managers. Since I had to convert it to a Word document, it got to be too big then to email, but I believe I used Dropbox, and I believe you were able to access it. Is that right, Administrator Jeffrey?
That is correct.
So I'm happy if anybody wants to see my comments. I think it would save a lot of time. I've tried to put at least some comment to, you know, edits or things like that. I've addressed some items from the checklist that I think are required to be in, and I'm not sure they're necessarily addressed the way I read the you know, the checklist. But you know, I'm just one person, of course. So that would be my thoughts, is that if we could have everybody get their comments in as soon as possible, have Mr. Jeffrey look at them, address them, and at the next meeting or at the next workshop. In my view, preferably at a workshop.
Administrator Jeffrey, do you have a date when you'd like to see the comments from all the managers?
Yesterday, honestly, if I don't want to take up people's weekends, but if there's any way I can get them by the time you go to bed on Sunday, that would be extremely helpful. We reporting is May 31st, so or May 1st, excuse me, May 1st. So it really has to be done in April, those next two meetings in April. So if we want to bring something to the board at the April 1st meeting so that they can, you know, look at what's done, we really need next week to be able to put those comments, to either address them, you know, respond to those comments, or to implement those comments.
President Ziegler.
Manager Pedersen?
Okay, so I spent 4 hours this afternoon reading through everything, and I went through all of the other samples you also sent. And I think we have a fantastic document, you know, compared to the detail that are in those other reports. Ours is just whoppingly full of a lot of very detailed information. So I have general comments to make about it, but I don't have pages and pages of docs. So for me, I'm happy to get everything in for you probably tomorrow, because I spent time today doing it.
That would be great. One more thing, President Ziegler.
Yes.
I do want to remind people that this isn't the full document. We also have the water quality report and the audit findings that go into it as appendices. So there's additional raw data that is available or will be available shortly. Right, Josh?
Mr. President,
Manager Cook.
Yeah, I think it would help speed things up if Mr. Jeffrey, you could make a Dropbox link available to managers if they want to look at my comments at all. I mean, it's totally up to them, but if you could make it available, they can look at it if they want to or not on that basis.
Yeah, I believe we
I'll say more later, but go ahead. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe we have that SharePoint site where this was there. We can utilize that.
Mr. President,
Manager Duval.
so Terry, what are the appendices that are going into it as well?
Appendices, President Ziegler, Manager Duval, the appendices are the audit report for 2022.
The financial audit?
Then,
The financial audit?
correct. And then Staff Maxwell puts together a water quality report of all the water bodies and the data that he's collected throughout the year, trends that are being seen in lakes, streams, etc. Updated CRAS, all the minutia behind the scenes.
Thank you.
And that's larger than this document. So.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook.
just a little bit follow on to what Manager Pedersen said, et cetera, it's obvious it's subjective, but, clearly even at its current state, this is a good document compared to others. But as I mentioned before, I mean, my goal is always to try to have better and better product. And I don't want to be the king in the land of the blind. I want our district to shine by putting out a report that clearly reflects, the work that we've done. And I think, the annual report is probably the one piece that at least hopefully people at Mauser are reading, and hopefully other people will be reviewing. So my only goal is to make it the best possible report that we have the ability to do, regardless of what others might do. That's all I have. Thank you.
Manager Crafton, did you have any comments?
No, I'm still going through it. I got most of it printed off today as I was starting to read it, and my printer says it's jammed and I couldn't get the rest of the report out, but I'll get it. I'll look at it online if I have to. So, but I'll try to get that done by the end of the weekend.
Good. Any other questions or comments on the annual report? Okay, project and program update.
President Ziegler, managers, there are a couple of things we want to talk to you about tonight briefly, just to bring you up to speed. One of them I'll talk about, and the other one Engineer Soviak will talk about. Actually, two I'll talk about. First one is the EHAP, Youth Systems Health Action Plan. We've had a couple of meetings. We have identified the technical advisory panel. Manager Crafton will be serving from the board. We have 2 CAC members, and we have really good representation from city community development departments, which is something we really wanted to seek out, because if we're doing a planning document, it would be best to work with the planning department. So we'll be sending out an invite to have the first TAP meeting roughly at the middle to end of April. We'll do that. We do have an outline of a draft outline of what we expect the report will be and contain. Engineer Soviak and I and staff Forbes will be going through that outline and making sure that we're capturing things that we have heard in various meetings throughout the year, and we'll start rolling on that in earnest. The other one I would like to talk to you about before turning it over, hi Amy, is the infamous Purgatory Creek Recreation Area berm. So little background for managers. I'm going to shut off this aerial for just a second, and that'll give you a little better idea of what used to be in this area. So this is a topographic map. Purgatory Creek just cut straight through. It was just a large, partially drained or mostly drained wetland throughout this area. City of Eden Prairie was having issues with flooding of Technology Drive and others. So they petitioned the watershed district. And I apologize, I don't recall the year, 2015, Scott, or even before that, wasn't it? 9, maybe?
I believe the petition was in the like 1999 or 2000.
Okay. Yeah. So with that petition, the district undertook the project on Eden Prairie land and constructed this berm here, excavated this area for several purposes: wetland restoration, flood storage, and water quality. An ancillary benefit, but I'll get to that ancillary benefit in just a bit. But when this berm was built, what we've been experiencing, zoom in here and I'll shut off the contours. So we've experienced a combination of subsidence and erosion. So this is the intended spillway. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right where the Purgatory Creek line now runs through. And what is happening is this has become the overflow area. Actually, not even overflow. It flows most of the time during normal water conditions. The City of Eden Prairie, this is part of their Purgatory Park, and they have a trail here. I don't know if anybody's been on it now, but I'm really surprised that they're able to utilize it. It's basically some 2x12s laid across the gap there.
If you're careful, you can ride your bike across.
Yeah, it goes
If you're
slow.
walking, it's no problem at all. Just don't fall off.
But the ancillary benefit is that we are able to, the carp pool right here, moving water. So Staff Maxwell and the seasonal help are able to go in and actually electroshock and harvest carp in this spot. Actually in several budgets, we've continued to have this berm project in there. It would be a maintenance project. The City of Eden Prairie has worked with Wank at the time when they started the project, now Stantec, to develop plans to repair the berm. And in those plans would also then put a plunge pool and a sluice gate weir structure at this location so we could still function for the carp harvest that we've been having. And then the City of Eden Prairie would replace their trail. In conversations with Patrick Segura and Robert Ellis of the City of Eden Prairie, we have come to a gentleman's agreement at this point of how this project would work. So Stantec would be the engineer on the project, and they would be in charge of all construction administration, construction surveying, closeout documents, etc. That cost would be split 50-50 between the district and the City of Eden Prairie. The surcharge and repair of the berm would be split 50-50 between the City of Eden Prairie and the district. The plunge pool and CARP recruitment area would be borne by the district in total. And any trail repair would be borne by the city of Eden Prairie in total. The engineer's estimate or engineer's opinion of cost at this time for the project would be $136,500 roughly. The contract administration, construction administration, etc., they have it at 41,400, but they did not include getting a permit from us. So I would up that to 45,000 to getting a permit from us. I think they thought if they got the core permit, then they would have ours, but that's not the case. So the splitting out of that would be the district for the berm repair itself. The district would pay 62,245. Eden Prairie would pay 62,245. And again, these numbers will be solidified. We work out a cooperative agreement with Smith Partners and the city of Eden Prairie, similar to what we had with Lower Riley Creek or some of the other projects we've done with them. The carp area, the carp harvest area, that's borne by Riley Purgatory, would be 10,450. The cost of the construction administration, contract administration, then would be split to 22,500 or $22,500 each, bringing our total part of that cost to $95,195. In the budget, the district has set aside $134,000 of our funding for that. So we do have already levied for and budgeted funds to pay for this. It would be it would come out of the operations and maintenance budget, although it is in a line item by itself, but we aren't putting in a new capital project. We're repairing an existing project that the district had done. What I would like to do is bring the plans, the draft plans, which really is just filling in that gap and repairing it, and ask for the board to order the project so that we can begin having Smith Partners draft a cooperative agreement that puts forward those specifics that I've just said now and others in terms of long-term maintenance, who's going to take over the permit in the end. Right now, we are the permittee under both the existing Army Corps of Engineers permit and the Department of Natural Resources permit, which is interesting to say the least, because we do not own the land that these structures are on. So I do think it's a good project simply to return this. I mean, there was a reason it was done in the first place, and if the district wanted to put that money forward, then best to return it to it. We could realize some savings of 10,500 by not doing the carp spillway, but I do think that that's one of the biggest benefits we get out of that berm. And then I lost my train of thought. I think that's really it. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this project to the best of my ability. Some of it does predate me, so I might look to Engineer Sobiak or Mr. Smith if they have any knowledge of it. But with that.
Mr. President.
Manager Cook.
Yeah, so need some clarification here. So what I'm so I look at the part where the you're putting in a plunge pool. So that area right there, what would be the cost of just fixing that and putting in the plunge pool?
Just fixing that without doing the carp?
No, with the plunge pool. And so we can take out the carp. I'm assuming plunge pool equals carp capture area.
Yeah, so that would be moved over to this location. Total project cost is still going to be $136,450 or $500 roughly.
Right, but
So
but I'm asking, so what's that piece right there from where cursor to the right? Right there, right in there.
just to do that and that alone
Yeah.
was 10,000. Nope. Excuse me, $10,450.
So can I ask, so that, right, well, we don't own the land. I mean, the district doesn't own the land.
Correct.
I'm just saying, I have a little reticent with us paying 50% of the cost of something we don't own. Somehow it got deteriorated. I can certainly see paying to do whatever is necessary so we can have the, wherever the, the carp capture area pool is placed. I can see adding that. That clearly is a clear benefit to the district and helps us, with our carp capture program on that basis. But I guess I'm a little befuddled about why we would be contributing more.
For
Seems like
flood control and water quality aspects that were the original part of the petition project, the original part of that project benefit.
Is there, I mean, what's downstream of that? I mean, so I guess it winds all the way through, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So is there really, I mean, there is no, I mean, what's the elevation difference between the two bodies? I mean, is it really a flood control aspect to it?
Flood control is for this area here, for the actual purgatory wreck area, not for the downstream part. So lifetime floods out, technology drives. There's also concerns about the integrity of technology drive. So yeah, the flood control is in this area that's on the aerial photography right now.
And Terry, managers, I'd just like to point out that these do kind of operate as big stormwater ponds. Purgatory Creek flows through, stuff settles to the bottom, and then continues on. That's the water quality aspect of it.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that, but it seems like we've had, so who was supposed to have maintenance on this? Is there a maintenance agreement in place?
President Ziegler managers, that's the other part that would be worked out in this cooperative agreement. There was intended to be a maintenance agreement, but I can find no record of it. Bar Engineering finds no record of it. The city of Eden Prairie finds no record of it. So at this time, there is no maintenance agreement between the two, and we are the permittee of record as far as the Army Corps of Engineers and the DNR is concerned.
Well, but just being the permittee simply means we got to construct it. Does the permit have maintenance requirements or anything in it?
Yes.
And so how are we going to do maintenance when we don't own the property?
That's what we would work into the cooperative agreement when we do that. Right now, we don't have any. So it would be a cooperative partnership with the city of Eden Prairie to repair the berm.
And afterwards, whatever gets done, what's anticipated?
So my desire, and I believe Engineer Soviak's desire, would be to turn it all over to the city of Eden Prairie, with the exception of that spillway that would be our carp management.
Mr. President? Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
One last comment, I guess. I mean, I guess what difference, $10,000 swing one way or the other between 50-50 and not 50-50. It just seems to me it doesn't set well with me. So I guess I'm just come down to a 50-50 split. If we're going to put money in it, we just add all the costs up, divided by 2. Other than we're not going to pay for their bike trail repairs.
Yeah, so the trail numbers are not included in this, so I don't, there'd be 20,000 or whatever for their trail portion of it.
I think it would be simpler just to do 50-50 because we'll have the specs. We'll know exactly what's going to go into the whatever extra. You said it wasn't that much. Make the contract simple. Split it 50-50 down the line and get done with it. And we move on for what? As long as I've been involved with the watershed district, this has been on the list. So.
Yeah, I would really like
Those are just my thoughts. Make it simple, easier and simple.
Mr. President,
Manager Duval.
I have a question for Administrator Jeffrey. So you mentioned the 136K before. Did we have something in the budget currently for some element of this?
No.
What was that again?
Yeah, President Ziegler, Manager Bell, we have $134,000 in the budget allocated for this. And our portion under this current split would be 95.2.
So less.
Yeah, so we would have, so it's 40,000 less than what we budgeted for it. I see where your mind's going already with this.
Okay, well, that was my question.
Mr. President?
Manager Cook.
So is it Stantec that would be the engineer? Is that right?
President Ziegler, Manager Cook, that is correct. So that's the other thing we would have to do with with legal is have them draft an agreement. They already have done the plans on the city's dime.
Well, I may just continue. Here's one reason I'm asking. I wasn't very satisfied as to what apparently came out of St. Hubert's, where if I understood discussion last time, those engineers didn't even want to sign off on the final. I don't know what happened there, but I guess I would sooner have BAR do the engineering than anybody else. But certainly let BAR speak to that. But so those are my concerns. I'd sooner have us do the engineering. I mean, in fact, do the engineering, hire the contractors, get it done right, and the city writes us a check for half the cost. With a cap, obviously.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, the design is already done, so I don't know that BAR would want to become responsible for another engineering firm's design. But moreover on that, St. Hubert's was, it really wasn't the engineers not wanting to sign off. It was the, pardon my way of phrasing it, ass over tea kettle way of that entering into that contract where bits and pieces were put together. Smith Partners didn't review the original agreement. It just was not moved through in a methodical, logical way. So it left us with a really bad contract.
Well, so I just don't want repeats of that. Obviously. And I don't want a repeat of the Middle Riley Creek either in the future. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but both of those projects leave a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth for somewhat different reasons, but somewhat similar reasons. So that's why I would be in favor of maybe BAR managing the project. I don't know. That's just, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm putting my relying on BAR too much, but I think they've done a good job by and large on everything that they've done. So I have my faith in them, at least as a management. So that's just something I'd like us to consider.
I'll discuss that with BAR.
President Ziegler.
Manager Crafton.
So I guess as I look at this, we've been talking for several months about,
Years.
well, particularly the last few months, about having Eden Prairie pick up the maintenance on it. We want to get out from under that part. And so
Mhm.
this makes total sense to me. We want control of the place where we're gonna do the carp. You know, the electrofishing and that stuff. But I think this is a good plan. I mean, we're helping them out, so because of the water quality piece, but that we want them to take over that other part of the berm or the trail, and we want them to have all the maintenance ongoing. So we would have
I agree.
input into what we want with the fishing part or the fish part. So to me, this makes total sense. I like the way it was laid out.
I agree.
So I have a question, I think, for Scott Sobiak. This washed out. It was kind of a happy accident in that we figured out how to get the carp to congregate in one spot. But is the spillway adequate to keep it from washing out somewhere else again?
President Ziegler, managers, the entire recreation area, the large open water to the south of the berm and the area north, under high water levels, essentially function as one large basin. So that berm is designed to overtop. It's designed to spill over for the larger events. It just so happened, as Administrator Jeffrey stated, that the portion of the berm that has washed out after that large rainfall event in 2014, it subsided. It settled a little bit. More water went over it than what was intended, started to wash out. And then, of course, we're now 9 years after the fact of its initial erosion. So it just continued to get worse. Once it's restored, the intent is to force that water back over to the primary spillway underneath the bridge. But again, this berm at some point will overtop in the future. And I think it's important that Eden Prairie understand that it will overtop and that the spillway be designed in a manner such as to minimize the potential for it to wash out again.
Mr. President?
Follow-up question.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
it's going to function like two different spillways? So the one spillway under the bridge and then overtopping, that will be an area where it can overtop without eroding the path and so forth? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Primarily the water will go over the spillway that's underneath the bridge. And then under high water level conditions, which I forget the exact return period. I want to say it's around a 10-year event, maybe a little bit more frequent. The berm itself will overtop. Not the entire berm, a section of it. I forget how many feet of it.
Mr. President?
Manager Cook?
Well, okay, so we want one or two things. Either Eden Prairie, they got to take on the maintenance. And two, if they're going to be the design and that design fails, they're going to have to step up and take care of the design failure. I gotta say, to me, it looks like the spillway's in the wrong spot, to be honest with you. But I'm not a hydrologist. I'm not an engineer, but there's got to be, this has got to be designed to withstand that 10-year event. And we certainly need BAR to weigh in and say at least that they think that it will, whatever engineer comes up with this.
All right. So I've heard, just so I'm clear what I'm trying to bring back in April, nail down that split, 50-50, make it as simple as possible. Make sure that Eden Prairie will take over the maintenance, long-term maintenance of it, and Eden Prairie will assume liability for failure of the engineered plans. Did I capture that?
I believe so.
Okay. That is all I have, unless Mr. Smith unmuted. Uh-oh, Mr. Smith's got something to say.
Mr. President, managers, I'm kind of looking to Mr. Sobiak for helping my fading, aging memory, but I do recall when I first got involved with the district that Mr. Obermeyer was flagging this as a kind of a nagging situation. I believe that part of the problem was that the original project was done without a cooperative agreement. And so the responsibilities of the parties was left unclear, though the district was holding a permit that held maintenance obligations. And I believe for some time, the city was simply wanting the district to come in and pay for repairing this. So it sounds like we've evolved to a point where Mr. Jeffries had these new discussions and there's more of a sense of a shared responsibility in the district identifying its CARP needs. But I'm just eager to see if that is Scott's recollection of reality, and if there are any other warnings that Mr. Obermeyer left in his retirement letter.
I got his number still.
President Ziegler, managers, Council Smith is absolutely correct. That the original discussions back in 2014, the city was requesting that the district just come in and repair the berm at the district's cost. Over the years, I think the delay that in the city moving forward with anything, and the district really standing their ground, and rightfully so, that this is your project, city, you petitioned it, we built it, it's supposed to be yours, has gotten to the point now where they're willing to go to that 50-50 split.
Yeah, even my first, President Ziegler, managers, my first sit down with, at the time, it was Dave Modrow and Rod Rue in 2017 was, yeah, you guys come in and fix it. And then when I said, well, no, we're not going to do that, they said, well, we've got a bunch of material down at the Public Works building. We'll just go and use that. And that was when we said, well, then you got to get a permit from us. So yeah, it has come a long way from where the initial conversations were. And President Ziegler, if I may, I would like to kind of speak to that a little bit further. I think this board and staff have gone a long way to heal some rather rough relationships that we've had with municipalities. President Forrester really believed that there should be conflict between cities and watershed districts. And I guess perhaps to some degree that's true because their goals aren't always aligned, but it's a lot easier to get things done when you're cooperating.
Okay, any further questions or comments on this? Okay, I think we have one more thing on the agenda.
Engineer Soviak would like to speak to the Galpin crossing at Bluff Creek Galpin crossing.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do you need to share your screen?
I am going to share here. So if you managers, if you remember back during the fall tour, I'll call it, we were out touring. One of the areas we looked at was Bluff Creek, Upper Bluff Creek, in relation to the restoration project that the feasibility study had been presented a couple of months prior. I had mentioned the possibility of cooperating with the city of Chanhassen as part of their street reconstruction project around Galpin Boulevard to potentially replace the existing culvert under Galpin at Bluff Creek. And the graphic here on the screen, we've got Galpin Boulevard. I've just sort of circled in red that crossing. The feasibility study on the stream restoration was for this portion downstream of Galpin, as well as the larger wetland complex upstream. At that time, in working with the city of Chanhassen and their consultant, it came to our attention that they're going to be redoing this roadway, presents an opportunity to maybe get in there and do some work above and beyond what the city was planning on or is planning on doing, because they currently aren't planning on replacing the pipe, aren't planning on doing anything with the crossing. The existing crossing itself is a 42-inch concrete pipe that is elevated above the stream bed. I'm showing here with this arrow, that's roughly 1.5 to 2 feet. So it really is impeding any type of wildlife passage through this reach. So that large drop prevents a lot of critters, I'll call them, from getting up into the culvert. In addition, the slope on this culvert is steep enough that the velocities of water coming through the pipe when water is flowing are sufficient that really nothing can get through it. It's about 13 feet per second under that 100-year, which is really fast. I mean, that's water that you would have a very difficult time even standing in if there's any depth to it. So a couple months ago, the managers asked that we go ahead and look at, well, what can we do? Can we cooperate with the city and replace this culvert, make it more ecologically friendly? So we've gone ahead and we've looked at several different scenarios, with the primary goal being trying to reconnect the creek itself to the floodplain and provide additional flow capacity through here. The graphic is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's over exaggerated in that the crossing size itself is ginormous relative to what are supposed to be mature trees, but it's a cartoon. It's to get the idea across that really for a crossing like this, you'd like to have a large span with the clear spans, and you can actually even get the floodplain through this area. There are some restrictions, as you know, as part of the regulatory program in terms of impacting flow rates and flood levels. So taking that into consideration, we've iterated through and come up with several different options to replace this this crossing. Alternatives 1 through 5 here, where we're looking at 1 through 4, I guess, is what we're showing, existing conditions being number 5. Different size of crossings, whether it's an arch pipe, so it's more of an elliptical shape, or a box culvert of different sizes. And as we iterate through, what we really needed to keep in mind was, what are the impacts to the flood elevations, to the velocities, to the flow rates? What I'm showing here with the graphic with these different letters, this A would be the upstream side of the crossing. The B is downstream of the crossing. C is almost midway between Galpin and 78th, and then D is just upstream of 78th. What I want to really just sort of highlight here is, with all these different alternatives that we looked at, any place you see a red, that means there's an impact to a flood level at some location. And if we're going to impact flood levels, that starts to get into permitting challenges, regulatory challenges, and it can also start to even impact flow rates and velocity. So we continue to iterate through this and ended up with, I'm going to jump right to the nuts and bolts of it, where we looked at these 4 alternatives. We're going to end up recommending alternative 3, where we are recommending installing a box culvert that is 6 feet high by 5 feet wide. And that box culvert itself would be embedded into the creek bottom by roughly 1 foot in this area here. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to naturalize the creek bed. Again, helps provide some better wildlife passage. In addition to that, and instead of just dropping the pipe, keeping it at the same slope, we're recommending that we flatten that pipe out to slow down those velocities. Again, trying to help for fish passage, wildlife migration, macroinvertebrates getting through here and so forth. But because the pipe, and if we flatten it out, that downstream end of the pipe is going to come up a little bit higher in elevation. Well, we need to make sure that we can connect that up to the creek itself. So we're recommending a long rock riffle be installed at the downstream end of the pipe as well. In the plan view, it would extend a fair distance, about 180, 185 feet. to get that transition and that slope and the velocity slow enough to get flow into the creek and allow passage of wildlife. One thing that jumped out in terms of the project itself is, and I'll flip back to this, the project costs surprised us when we started to pull the numbers together. I was not expecting to see an alternative 3 for replacing a 42-inch culvert with a 6x5 box to cost almost $500,000. I'll just highlight it here. That's the midpoint. That's our best guess at this point in terms of for this level of design. Of course, there's a large swing. It could be significantly less, could be more. As you get into more detailed design, that would flesh itself out. Couple of things that are really driving this cost. One of them being concrete costs right now are really expensive. Just to acquire and get the box culvert to the site is roughly $125,000. Now, this culvert is also in the neighborhood of 15 feet below ground. So in order to excavate down 15 feet, you have to open up a large area. So there's a lot of excavation involved with this that the city currently isn't planning on. There's a portion of the roadway that they are planning on that we've excluded those costs, figuring that the city would be covering them anyway. So it's really expensive. There are, in terms of benefits, like I said, there's the ecological benefits. We did do a quick sort of qualitative assessment, and it helps with hydrology. It helps with the ecological factors and the fish passage. In terms of phosphorus or sediment reduction, the crossing itself does provide some benefit. We didn't quantify it, but by reducing those velocities, it helps us reduce shear stress, which helps reduce downstream erosion. I think this is something that the board should consider, think about. We do have a draft memorandum that administrator is reviewing. We'd like to present that or give that to the board for their consideration, where it goes through more of the details of the analysis and summarizes things a little bit better than what I'm doing here in a quick 10-minute little spiel. So with that, I'll just open it up to any quick questions.
Mr. President.
Manager Cook?
Well, so a couple of observations. I have a view that these costs could be coming down here in the near term with financing costs going to where they're at. I think the demand for some of these products, including concrete, may decline significantly. We have a little bit of the, catch-up gouging, I believe, going on. At least I think that's what a lot of the economists think about. So I think we should take timing into account in doing this. Secondly, a 6-foot culvert in the square box is a big culvert. It's a lot of dirt to move. And I guess I would need to be convinced, do we really need that on this stream? I don't go on that Gelpin very often, but I do go along there. I guess I don't have a good idea of actually what the flow rates are and what do we really need. Do we really need that kind of a culvert, or are we better off sticking with a smaller culvert and doing some ponding or something on either side to, restrict water flow, slow down the water? So I think, I'd like to, I think maybe at the next workshop, have a discussion of the alternatives. Are there alternatives to minimize the need to do a box culvert, put it down so deep as what you've indicated? Are there some alternatives that will have the same impact? I don't think we have any critters other than maybe deer that would go under there at that time. It just seems to be a large culvert. If money was no object, it would be a no-brainer. I just make that point. That would be a no-brainer, right? Put in the box culvert, fine. But that is a lot of money and we have a lot of projects. And I'm just wondering what other alternatives can be done. And then secondly, as to funding, is there some county road funding that we could get? Can we go to Carver County and see if there's some money there? Are there some, some other funds or grants that could help, cover this cost? And then going back to the city, I mean, this is a benefit to the city and what their contribution would be, especially if we're considering putting in a significant amount of money on Upper Riley, right? So those are the things I would like us to be looking into. Quite frankly, I don't see the Upper Buff Creek as being number one on my scoreboard. I mean, and I bike that thing, like I said, I don't go up Gulpin, but I bike around that wetland, et cetera, the whole time. And maybe I see water going over the bike path twice, if that, in a year. So I think there's reason to consider waiting as far as costs are concerned. And if costs come down, then maybe doing the whole 6-foot culvert makes sense. But if costs aren't going to come down, I would like to at least see what else could be done to handle the issues that you mentioned, particularly the speed of the water, that's probably caused the erosion that we have on the downstream side on that basis. So I'm not opposed to fixing that, but at what cost is the question. So I'd like to see where can we find other funds if we want to go 6-foot, box culvert, which would be great, but I think that's way a lot of money to be putting into such a limited area, a limited project. That's all I have. Thank you.
President Ziegler?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Manager Cook. When I first saw these prices, much like Scott, it was shocking to say the least. I though, rather than going down the other route, I would almost say if we don't want to spend the $491,000 on a box culvert, to just pull it and not even spend any more money at this time on it. Because they're, like Engineer Sobiak mentioned, the city has no intention of digging up that culvert otherwise. So I think the ancillary benefits got of another design is still going to probably be at $250,000, and we're probably not going to achieve all of the benefits. So that would almost be my suggestion at that point, to just say, and that's really what we wanted, is your reaction. Is this something at this time that really is worth us spending $500,000 on? I'm certainly not going to fall on my sword to say, yeah, we should spend $500,000 on this culvert. We haven't investigated, maybe in the future, if it doesn't align with the project, but we decide that with the wetland restoration, everything downstream, maybe there's an opportunity we can jack something through there, rather than open cutting it in the future. But yeah, I think at this time with the concrete prices, and moreover, did you mention the lead time needed to get these culverts now?
I did not, but in order for the project to be constructed in 23, the culverts would need to be ordered by April. If they're ordered after April, the soonest you would expect to get them will be mid-24, according to the suppliers.
Wow.
So again, it speaks to your timing point.
So, Mr. President,
Manager Duval.
Administrator Jeffrey, so when is the city planning on doing something? And that was sort of the impetus for thinking about it, right?
President Ziegler, Manager DeVell, that is correct. The city is looking at doing all of Galpin starting in 2023, late 23, correct?
Correct.
Now, they are looking at phasing it so that they would do the north half first and the south half second. So we might be looking at 24, but it's still might not work out for our timing to let prices go down and have the lead time necessary to get it. So, but there is no harm in us waiting and seeing what happens, other than we just don't do this project, which frankly, at this cost, I don't know that the benefits are there.
So if it was something that we were interested in doing, this isn't in the current budget, is that correct? I mean, if we wanted to do something with this, say we did, how would that work from our budgeting point of view?
But President Ziegler, Manager Duval, so we did budget for this reach of Bluff Creek, but we only budgeted to go from the outlet, the downstream side of this culvert to Highway 5. So this culvert wasn't necessarily budgeted in that overall project. So we'd be borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. We would have to levy additional funds as we went down into that other project.
So there's money in the budget for part of it, and this would be an incremental adder.
Yes, it would be an addition. So when we were doing the scoping document, the feasibility report, we decided, since we're adjacent to that large headwater wetland, and wetlands were a priority, and that one being such a large area, let's look at if there's some rehabilitation we could do there. Since those two are connected by the culvert just became a natural nexus.
So this is an opportunity that might just be one to pass on at this point.
That is correct.
And at some future, as Manager Cook was suggesting, it might be feasible a couple of years down if something else fits in where prices are down, where it's no different than it was today, or not that much different.
Right, because the addition, President Ziegler, Manager Duval, the additional costs that would come in the future we would bear the whole cost of the road replacement itself. But given we're looking at $500,000, I don't know what that would be. So you were going to say something, Engineer Slovak. I'm sorry.
President Ziegler, managers, Administrator Jeffrey did make a good point earlier about an alternative installation method in terms of jacking a pipe. That would be something that we could consider at a future date if a project were to move forward, so that there wouldn't be the associated as much excavation or replacing of a roadway that was just restored. We could basically jack the pipe underneath the roadway and keep the roadway open during construction.
President Ziegler.
Manager Crafton.
So Scott, if we did that, would we still get the multiple benefits that you mentioned? Because I think they're well worth it. And the other thing I was wondering was whether, I think some of the watershed districts are looking at going for more habitat funding, and whether that there might be a source there if it's pulled together enough that we could use that for an application.
President Ziegler, Manager Crafton, in terms of realizing ecological benefits with a future project, I'll call it, with that jacking of the pipe underneath the roadway, I do believe you could realize a lot of the benefits. It would really depend on what size pipe we could really jack underneath there. They can jack some really large pipes. So I think we would realize most, maybe not all, but most of those benefits.
Okay. I would like us to keep exploring that, because, and if there's any way to pull something together so we could apply for other funding that would help mitigate that, that might make a difference.
President Ziegler, managers, Manager Cook brought up the city. I think that's a non-starter. Again, just going back to the whole, we're not going to replace it anyway, so why would we want to put money in? As far as state aid funding, because it is a state aid road, and Scott, I'm not a transportation engineer. I'm just digging back into my cobwebs. I believe it would either have to be a bridge or something that was being shown to eliminate flood risk, which it wouldn't fit into either of those.
The third category is you'd have to show that the pipe is in need of repair, so extremely deteriorated.
Right, which it is not.
which it is not.
But we can certainly see if there are other funding opportunities out there, but yeah, my recommendation at this time would be to pump the brakes and, and explore. One, do prices come down? Two, alternative construction methodologies. Three, other funding sources.
Manager Pedersen, are you still with us? Do you have any comments?
Yes, I'm still here, and I guess I'm also on the side of, it's a lot of, it's $500,000 for a culvert. I think there's a lot better place to spend that kind of money and get more bang for our dollar. If you can find another way of doing this, that it's less costly, maybe even put it off for just a bit and wait to see if concrete prices normalize. But my concrete contractors that I work with in business they're not giving me any indication that they're thinking it's going to come down.
Yeah, this is $500,000 we can put in restoring that wetland.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I'm kind of thinking it's expensive. It sounds like a good project, but I'm not sure where it would fit if we compared it to all the other projects on our list.
Yeah.
And especially at that cost.
Yeah, President Ziegler, Engineer Sobek, that's a really good question. We didn't score it using our PPL, did we? I don't think it would score very high if we just looked at it on its own.
But I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's, I was just gonna list all the things that it isn't providing that we would score it high on.
Yeah, it would, my gut tells me it would score in the upper 20s at least. Just because we get, it's in the headwaters, it's visible, accessible by the public. Technically, there would be funding partners because we don't have to replace the roadway. So we're already up to almost 21 points with those three categories alone.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the quantitative benefits of phosphorus reduction, we're not going to realize that. We would realize a little bit from stream stabilization, wouldn't realize volume. It would align with some of the district goals. So that's where my gut tells me it's in the mid to high 20s, but there are other projects that score much higher.
Yeah, Mr. President.
Manager Cook?
I would just reiterate, Mr. Sobiak raised a good point. I mean, all these projects, we should run through our scoring process. I think that's just the best practice. And it'll be what it'll be, at least it'll inform us. And it sounds to me like our gut about this project is that it may be great, but it doesn't rank up there yet to where we would do extraordinary measures to try to put it in at this time, unless we had somebody waltzing in with a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'm
President Ziegler.
Manager Patterson?
Yeah, so, in reading through the report today, thinking about sections of Purgatory Creek where, you've got huge erodible areas and they already got the red all in them. I'm thinking that's probably more of a priority for us than a culvert replacement.
We do have the stretch from Riley or from Purgatory Rec area to Starring Lake. Scores now,
So is it worth the time then to go through and compare it and see what it looks like from a environmental priority and compared to, and somewhere in there you have to include the cost. You don't move forward on a project if you could do 10 other ones that were equal.
we can score it quick. That doesn't take much time to
Okay.
do the scoring for it. So,
President Ziegler.
Manager Crafton?
So with some of these other projects, I mean, if there are places that we should be spending the money and we can get more bang for the buck, are they going to provide the ecosystem benefits that we're striving for, hopefully.
President Ziegler, managers, especially any of our restoration projects, stream restorations, we are always looking at ecological benefits. Wetland restoration, obviously, we'd be looking at ecological benefits. So yes, I do, we wouldn't necessarily be just saying, all right, well, let's go dig a pond somewhere then with this money.
Good. After hearing some of what that report was today,
Yeah.
I'm not a big supporter of storm ponds. When you saw that first drawing, she had water coming in and water going out. That's always been my thing. And then with these big storms, it just goes whipping through. How much of it settles out, and then how much hazardous waste have you got in there with heavy metals, and anything you do to excavate's got to go to a hazardous waste place. So I'd rather not put the money in another storm pond for sure, but if we could find, if there are ways we could incorporate more of the ecological benefits, I think that would be valuable.
Oh, Mr. President.
Manager Cook.
So my thought is to do as Mr. Jeff Reams, Soviak said, score it, bring it back to us. They have further thoughts on it. To bring on the point, I think Bluff Creek has enough red on it that where we can spend money as opposed to this, and get huge ecological erosion, whatever adjective is appropriate. I think we can get more bang for the buck. This isn't going to go away, and it'd be a project, that'll always be there, and we can do it when we've got, the other bad ones done, which I hope will happen someday.
Yeah.
From my lips to God's, right?
President Ziegler, managers, we'll score it, and we'll see if it changes our opinion of a cost at all, and let you know at April 1st what our findings, or April 5th. Excuse me. I'll share my screen again for you, President Ziegler. That's all we have for projects and programs updates.
Okay, we have manager report. Manager Cook, I believe, asked for time to question some of the engineering, either the engineering report or the staff report. I can't remember. Manager Cook.
It was that. I'm sorry, Manager Cook.
No. Go ahead. You were going to
say you should have all received a bulleted outline from Manager Cook. I sent it to you Tuesday, I believe it was, Manager Cook.
I think that was it. Yeah.
So
I was really asking time to give a report, because I think it's important. I needed to share, my views, and I think putting together a report is the only way to, appropriately do it. I do hope you take the time to read it. I am not going to read it verbatim. I don't, with all due respect, but I think it's important for me to reiterate what I think, in my opinion, we should be focusing on. And so just at the top, I thought that the workshop and the presentation regarding what we've done on 10-year plan, et cetera, was a good start. I really am looking for a better, more detailed report on where we stand on the 10-year plan. What have we done? What haven't we done? Are we on time? Are we not on time? I think that's the only way we can look at that. And I thought we were going to be, that should be part of the scheduling. I think we're required to review the 10-year plan. So I just want to make sure that we do that. In the comments, I sent a lot of comments on the annual report, but I've had a chance to read it. It's a good start. I think it needs some significant work as far as prose is concerned. Some consistency as to how we refer to the board or the managers or the district. I think the organization should be looked at, because the projects, if you look at the index and that, are just kind of thrown there. And I think looking at some organization to that, would be helpful. But these are all in my comments, and if you want to look at them, I know Administrator Jeffrey will provide them to you. I really recommend, we consider hiring a proofreader, a professional writer to give it a read through. I'm not the best proofreader, and I think we owe it to our constituents to have somebody take the time to read through it, correct the prose, find out all those things that we just know should be there but aren't there. They're not very expensive to do, and I think it's something that Bowser looks at, but hopefully more of our constituents will look at. So I'll go on to the next one. Financials. I didn't have time to sit on any of the accounting finance meetings, but I again raised the issue that, as far as I know, the district has not adopted the financial policies that are recited that were recited in the last audit, and I hope that is corrected before this next audit is being issued. In number 4 has to do with the staffing, and I'd like to hear an update on staffing every meeting until we've hired somebody. I think that's important. I expressed last time my concern about the agreement with 9 Mile Creek. I think it is problematic to have our legal counsel represent both sides in the contract. That is not a best practice. I can say more later, but HR, I hate to beat a dead horse, but we really do need an HR professional at the very least to take a look at our organization, our employee handbook or lack thereof, policies, etc., and share with us what they see and what they recommend. I think it would be it's certainly not a best practice to go get advice from professionals who deal with this day in and day out. And to my knowledge, none of us have that kind of experience, and really none of the staff has that. So I underline, nobody I think has the requisite experience to do that. I brought that up many times, but I think it's extremely important. Also, it's particularly important, I think, that our policies be reviewed. There's a lot of law changes in this current session. So a lot of laws to address in our policies, and what do you call it? Personnel policies, personnel handbook, or whatever it is, needs to be prepared, reviewed, and revised to make sure that it's up to date and not violating these existing laws, or laws that will probably go into effect August 1, I think is the date. I've also mentioned IT issues. Again, it is be a best practice to have a consultant come in and at least review our system and advise us as to our security and systems protocols, so that we know what we have and where it might be improved. And again, to my knowledge, none of us have the experience to be able to truly evaluate our IT systems or our security protocols. My opinion is relying on somebody that you can call up for a problem is not adequate way of analyzing and your IT. And certainly if there is a hack, that's one of the worst black eyes I think that you can get. And it's likely to happen, even if we're just a lowly, watershed district. But I've provided Administrator Jeffrey with some referrals that he could talk to, et cetera. And I think this is an urgent matter to do. Bringing this in-house is not a best practice given our lack of experience. We'd mentioned and talked about previously document management. I haven't seen any reports or developments regarding that. My experience is it seems we clearly need to come up with some proper system to be able to manage our documents so that anybody with a need to know can find them readily without having to waste staff time. And that goes for whether it's me or anybody else making requests for for documents. I provided names. There's plenty of vendors out there with document management systems that aren't that expensive. And I think we should seriously look into that. Also previously mentioned, I think we should have an IT committee to oversee IT issues. Every significant company I know either has an IT committee or has an IT consultant to advise them regarding their systems and particularly their security. Also, item I mentioned before is, as far as I know, we've not done anything on a disaster preparedness plan. Although it's been, I think, 6 years since we've had a tornado in Chanhassen. As soon as I say that, probably May, one could hit us. And Administrator Jeffrey's work plan detail is a good start for having everybody know at least what a particular job requires. And then two, to add on that, the disaster part is who does what when there is a disaster, who goes where do we have sources? There's all kinds of sources on the web. I would assume, Smith Partners probably has a disaster preparedness, but I think all the larger law firms, et cetera, but maybe some of the other districts have them. And that would actually be probably a really good project for, what do we call it now, Minnesota Waters, or whatever, or the Association of Administrators. Maybe that's a good project they could do to come up with a template. Maybe the League of Minnesota Cities has one. I don't know. There's lots of resources out there, but I think we're neglectful if we don't have that. Moving on to item 8, website. I've not received any responses to the comments that I've made. I made the statement before. I make these comments to make us, better than the best. And I don't believe in being, the one-eyed giant in the land of the blind. That's my personal philosophy, and I think everything should be improved the best that we can. And the website, although it's a great improvement over the last one, it has room for improvement. And I'm willing to put in the time and show where things could be followed and where things could be better, and I've done that. So, and I made some more other detailed notes about that. You can read those, or Mr. Jeffrey can look at those. And just scrolling down right now. The other thing is I haven't heard a response regarding the request for being able to hire a consultant to advise on interactions between staff and management and managers. I thought we were, that was a grant we should be able to get. So I haven't seen an update on that. I think that we should be given an update on that. Of materials. I think we should be providing materials to the managers the same amount of time in advance of the workshop that we provide materials for the first meeting of the month, so that we all have time to review them and comment on them before we have the meeting. And I think that would save everybody time. And it's my understanding of the open meeting law, we have to have at least one copy available to the public. And that isn't the one, as people are reviewing it, they're supposed to have a copy available. They can review it, not necessarily as the various topics are brought up in a particular document. And with the fact that we have the web, we have the internet, I don't see there's any reason why we can't have all these documents posted on our website, on the meeting agenda in advance of the meeting, so anybody can pull down those documents before, during, or after their discussion. The other item is rules. I mean, I don't know where we're at. We've talked for a year now about looking at the rules and revising the rules. I think there's some obvious deficiencies I think we need to look at. One being steep slopes, another shoreline, lake bottom protections, requirements for local ordinances, idea of fragile habitats. This all brings Noble Hills to mind, along with some of the wetlands. And I think we need to move forward on these rules, and in particular, because I believe Chanhasen's local plan is up for review in 2025. I think it is. Other ones will come later, but I'd like to have our rules in place before Chanhasen's review of their local plan is up for review. Also, regarding the rules, up in Minnesota Waters, there was a great presentation on tree plans, street sweeping, et cetera. And I think we should be looking at incorporating those into our rules. Yeah, I think most of you went to, or you can get the presentations on how we can help keep phosphorus, out of our lakes, the Forest Lake area, et cetera. They got the same problem we have in, significant areas in Chanhassen in particular. Eden Prairie's got the same issues. Excuse me just a second. Yeah, I talked at the last meeting about the CAC. As I said then, I believe we owe it to the CAC to have a process to address their motions. Either we accept them, we tell them forget it, or we table it and have something done with it. But to leave them languish, I don't think is very respectful of their position. And so I encourage us to do something or adopt part of our policy that we as the managers are going to do something about it. Other item I have is item 14. This may be to Manager Duvall and Manager Crafton when they're in the Accounting and Finance Committee and the audit. To me, we have significant amount. We have due from St. Hubert's and we have due to Eden Prairie for the bridge, from St. Hubert's for the part of their costs, but I don't see those reflected in our financial statements. And it would seem to me that those should be reflected under generally accepted accounting principles. I talked about those in item number 15. And 16, my understanding is we're still the WACA person for what, 2 cities? And I would like to see at least some, report, and that it go also to those cities, telling them exactly what if we did do something or didn't do something. I know we addressed that briefly in our staff report, but I think we should have a year-end report, and those should, and a similar report should be provided to those cities that are delegated, that WACA authority to us. I mentioned this before. We have a significant amount of money to be spent on the E&O, education and outreach, but I haven't seen a detailed plan. Been doing that work for a while. It seemed to me it wouldn't be difficult to put together a plan for the upcoming year, what's going to be done, what's anticipated, and what the costs are, because we do have competing demands for our money. And I would think that education outreach should be providing that with us with a plan and a budget that goes along with it. 18, another item I brought up before, contract retainage. So the motion to adopt a policy, wasn't approved. So now I understand that every time we have a contract coming to us, we're going to have to decide what is the retainage and approve that separately. It seems to me that's kind of foolish. I had previously suggested we have retainage to the fullest extent allowed by law, make it simple for administration. And I think we should revisit that. Number 19, I had Lotus Lake rules violation. This is the same theme of keep these items on the agenda as old business or follow-up business. Haven't seen a report regarding any update on the violations of Lotus Lake. And when we have violations, I think it's important that we managers be kept apprised of the status, at least at every meeting, or certainly in the staff report. Number 20 on COVID. I know we've had multiple discussions about what are we going to do, when are we going to go back, but before we go back, I'm hoping that we have a plan for going back. Hopefully that's being worked on. One of the big questions I have, what if anything is this done with the current HVAC system? Has that been upgraded to be is it called HEPA compliant? I think it is. HEPA, I forget the acronym, but we should be requiring that system, because I don't think we're done with COVID. We won't be done with COVID probably forever. It'll be with us. And do we have we have a sanitation plan, et cetera, to go in effect? I know we had the offices closed. So that wasn't quite as important then, but we're opening up the offices, or when we do, I think we need to have a sanitation plan, whatever it is, and to go by it. 21, with respect to meetings, I've said this before. I think all the committees, all the meetings should be recorded, and there should be minutes for every meeting, and the minutes should be kept, and available on the website. I believe that is a requirement under the Bowser rules. That minutes, et cetera, be made available. I think we should do that. I've already stated that we had previously agreed about getting the minutes review out in advance, and Administrator Jeffrey good enough got that done promptly for the first meeting of the month, and hopefully that will continue, but that's only half of it. I mean, to save us time at these meetings, I would hope all the managers would take the time and review these minutes in advance and provide them to Administrator Jeffrey or whoever he delegates that to consolidate the comments. Now, I haven't looked, but I believe Administrator Jeffrey informed me that the minutes are now available through the website. Is that correct? Through the website?
Yes, through the website.
They are now.
Yes.
Okay.
All the minutes are available on the website.
That's great. That will certainly make it easier. And similarly, I understand you're working on getting the recordings on YouTube.
Yeah, when we get the new office administrator assistant in place, we'll be able to get working on that.
My last item, I think it was under 21. We talked about this before. It is in the governance manual that we're going to have a resolution for every item that was on the agenda, at least anyone that was put on by staff. If individual managers are going to raise something, or third parties, they were going to draft their own. There's one exception where staff after the fact can go draft a resolution, but that resolution then should be put into the minutes of the meeting. See, moving on to accounting and finance. I'm sorry. I did that a few minutes ago. Item 25, which I skipped over. I'm sorry about efficiencies. I think it would behoove us save time and effort. I don't know if staff is using dictation software such as Dragon, but that can be a huge time saver. And I certainly recommend, I use it. I certainly recommend consider using it. It's not the be all and end all, but it can certainly save a whole lot of time, especially if one is not a fast or proficient typist. Assuming that we're going to have a further discussion regarding Noble Hills project, I'd like to refer everybody to Minnesota statute section 13D.05 subdivision 3 paragraph C3, which has a pretty detailed recitation of the procedures we're supposed to go to if we're going to have a closed meeting regarding land. And I don't believe I'm not sure that we exactly followed that required process at the last time, but I think going forward, we need to be sensitive to make sure that we follow those specific requirements. With the Data Practices Act, I still have a number of requests outstanding that are not been addressed for several weeks. I think this is an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. We've designated the administrator as the responsible authority in the data practices compliance official. And we need to make sure that we follow those rules and requirements. And the last item that I have, I'd like to reserve for a closed session at the April meeting.
You're assuming we're going to have a closed session.
Well, we don't have to. But my guess is people would prefer we would have a closed session at the next meeting.
So for a closed session, we need a reason.
Well, I'd like to discuss Administrator Jeffrey's recent activities. I'll leave that at that for now, unless anybody wants to go into detail. But I also
think we need a closed session for that.
Huh? Pardon?
I think we need a closed session for that.
That's what I'm saying. So at the next meeting, I think we should have the closed session. And if that's all I have, and so it being 9:52, I'd be happy to move to adjourn.
I'll second that motion. Is there any other questions or comments that anybody had? I think we need a roll call vote for the motion to adjourn.
Manager Crafton,
Yes.
Manager Duval,
Yes.
Manager Cook,
Yes.
Manager Pedersen,
Yes.
President Ziegler.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night and try not to get stuck out in the weather. It sounds like it's going to be bad.
Night, everybody.
Thank
Night.
you. Take care.
Night.